Hey y'all, how we doing? Shout out to Bear Nation for tuning in for another episode of the Bear Necessities of Entrepreneurship, a podcast for the entrepreneur minded, created by entrepreneurs, discussing the real stories that give you the tools to overcome challenges and stay true to your real self. As always, I want to give a shout out to our partners over at Fin. Fin is a social good platform that creates employee engagement and builds culture. We've teamed up with Fin to give back to the communities that we serve. For every episode, we will be donating $10 to the cause of choosing by our guest in the Fin platform. Enjoy today's episode. Bear Nation, how we doing? We are back for another episode of the Bear Necessities of Entrepreneurship podcast. And today I'm excited to bring you my guest, Phil Buckley. Phil is an award-winning author and change management strategist with over 32 large-scale change initiatives under his belt, including co-leading global change management for the $19.6 billion Kraft Foods acquisition of Cadbury. And yes, we love our Cadbury eggs. He is the founder and president of Change with Confidence, a change management consulting firm that helps leaders and their teams work through changes that they need to make to be relevant and successful. Phil is the author of Change on the Run, 44 Ways to Survive Workplace Uncertainty, and Change with Confidence, answering the 50 biggest questions that keep change leaders up at night. So, Phil, say hi to Bear Nation for me.
Hi, Bear Nation. And Rob, thanks so much for having me on. This is the highlight of my week, and I'm having a great week. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you for joining us. And, there's a lot here that we just brought into that intro on, your background in this large global corporate and then just starting your own company, supporting change, and then writing these books. So we're going to kind of dig into all of it.
Great.
I think a great place to start, kind of the high level overview of your journey. You talk about leading the Kraft Foods into the acquisition of Cadbury. Tell me about, did you know you were going to go into corporate? How did you get into Kraft Foods? Like, how did you start this journey of your corporate life? And then we'll get into your entrepreneurship life here in a little bit.
Sure, certainly. So I kicked off my career, and I always had a passion for learning and development or teaching or helping people, and really clicked in with my values to serve. How do you make them their best? So training and development was a great fit, and I started off at a bank that was affiliated with the Canadian government, and it was specifically focused on supporting small and medium-sized entrepreneurs. So whether it was funding, whether it was the capability development, particularly of soft skills, or even, secure, how do you actually build a business plan? And I jumped into that and really started helping entrepreneurs to be their best. And from there, I went into Cadbury, and it turned into a 16-year journey, first of all in Canada, and then in the US, both in New Jersey and in Dallas. And then I went to the UK for 4 years to lead change management for the Cadbury organization. And training and development is very similar to change. It's how do we deal with the unknown, and how do we be our best going through it to the best advantage? So it had a lot of similarities. And as you said, after years and having a hostile takeover with Kraft at the time, and then what do you do when you have two organizations that are very strong, great cultures, but very, very different? And how do you merge them into one? So it was an adventure of over a year with my partner from Kraft, traveling the world, helping leaders and their teams really to be their best in new ways of working. So that was my corporate experience. And then I jumped into entrepreneurship.
So, there's a lot to digest with that big kind of acquisition and traveling and, having Canada, US, UK getting to work, in different locations and looking at culture and engagement, learning and development, and really helping with change. What was that moment, or what was that transition for you of saying, I've worked in this big corporate, I've gone through a large global, takeover of a brand, and now I want to start my own business and get back into doing something different. Like, what was that for you? And what was that trigger that said, hey, it's time to step away from, arguably one of the largest brands in the world,
right.
and move on? What was that, I guess, trigger point for you?
Certainly, and it was a challenge because Kraft, my experience with, they're tremendous. So you have everything going right for you in a corporate career. Everyone's supportive. You're successful with the broader team because it's not just you. It's just so massive, just a team dynamic that's successful. But what I noticed is through my career in corporate, I kept getting bigger geographies or bigger mandates. And the more you do that, the less you get that one-on-one connection with helping people to transition from how they do things in the past to how they need to. And that fear, that fight, flight, or freeze of what am I going to do now because I don't know what the next step is to be successful. And for me, that was a challenge because as I was moving on, it was like, okay, you can keep doing this. And it was becoming something that I knew quite well. So the fear that I had, and I think most entrepreneurs go through sort of fear responses when they try something new or they offer a new product or they get into a new territory or their funding is cut, whatever it is. And I was losing that sense of sort of the immediate moment and being sort of true to myself and growing in that way. So what I decided to do is I left the organization, which was great, very supportive of them, wrote a book, which I was afraid to do. And one thing in my past, and I think most entrepreneurs find that you're always struggling with your history, whether you've been successful or you've been challenged. And when I was 10 years old, I was pretty well illiterate. I'd kind of gone through, public school and had kind of missed sort of the ability to write. And when they finally caught it, it was corrected. But for me to write a book when I had challenges as a kid and that fear and almost that shame that you have when you don't meet the bar that has been set for you, I've never lost that feeling. So the sense is, if I'm going to write a book that's going to be real, that's going to be what I believe to be true about change, I'm going to put myself on the line. I'm going to get that, hey, am I good enough feeling again? And then I'm going to leverage that to help businesses as I move forward, to help them with change and lead by example.
Yeah. So, the fear of writing this book, was that in conjunction with launching your company Change with Confidence? And were you like working on the consulting and writing, or did you say, I'm taking a step away from corporate, I'm writing a book, and then decided to create a business? How is that like process of, you made this big decision to leave, you have this fear of writing, you're going to overcome it to write a book, and kind of just sit there and like, I'm sure as you left, and if you wanted to, there are hundreds of jobs opportunities leading, large global companies. So like, how is that process for you of saying, I'm tired of one way of doing things, I want to explore these other? And how did you go about processing that?
Certainly. So I left a successful career. So I think that was that entrepreneurial foundation of, I want to do something else. So it wasn't going to another company, probably wouldn't even replicate how much enjoyment I was getting that. It was about me pattern breaking and changing something new. And in my business plan, because I learned so much from the past that if you don't have a plan, you're kind of winging it and you're not going to be your best in entrepreneurship. To take 1 year, write the book, get it published by a large publisher, and then that would kickstart my consulting business. And the plan actually worked. I took a whole year, and that, the challenge of, 24-hour working, flying from, India to Geneva, and just that thrill of that big business, dynamic was, and then all of a sudden you're looking at a blank screen saying, I've told everyone in my life I'm writing a book on how to lead change, and to wrestle the 50 biggest questions that leaders, have a struggle with. It was a fascinating challenge for me, but it was one that I had to make, and really to overcome that sense of, well, you said you're going to do it. What are you going to do it? And then once I'd written the book, that was the fuel to drive it forward.
Yeah. I mean, that fear is fucking real, right? And you tell people, hey, I'm writing a book. And then you start realizing that you actually have to write the fucking book. And it's not
and it's got to be good. It's got to be good. It can't just be a so-so book. It has to be the best thing you could ever do in your life.
And it's not just that because a lot of people who write a book have, like, they have enough to say, like if they're speakers, they do these things, they have, but it's when you start sitting down and starting to write, and you start realizing that your brain's all over the place. And how do you put that into a cohesive flow and pattern? And so, it's a very real thing that I'm going through, and finishing up my book, which coming out, will have been out when this episode airs in October. But I'm still wrestling with this process of writing, and where we are today, sitting here recording this, I'm still trying to finish up a few key pieces of that book so I can get it to editing so that we can then turn it around and have the manuscript out and then still launch on time. I find every fucking reason not to write the book, right? And, I like that you said, hey, I took a year off to write because I didn't want to do writing and working. I launched my consulting, my consulting coaching business, launched a podcast, started writing a book. I am the master of winging it. I have a loose plan, and this is where and I kind of want to get into this with you because you have these books that are very detailed and process oriented, and my brain works differently in the fact that even when I go and speak, people are like, oh, give me a draft of what you're gonna do. I can't. I'll give you an outline. I have no fucking idea what's going to come out of my mouth. It's all here. And as long as I have process, because I feel off the room. And so when I still do business plans, I'm like, why the hell are we telling people to do, in school you teach a 50-page business plan. I'm like, what the fuck are we doing? And investors only want to see 10 slides, and I can go and do a 50-page business plan, but I overthink and it comes out terribly. But if you give me 10 slides and I give you an outline and I present it to you, that fluidity of winging it allows me, there's still structure, still a plan, but I can't over plan. So I guess when you talk about, building a plan and coming to some of your books, when you work with entrepreneurs, how do you kind of combat that of when is planning too much, right? Because great gets in the way of good. And when do you allow them to have that fluidity? And I would love to hear your thought on planning versus winging it, and what do you mean by that, and how do you kind of cover some of that with people?
Absolutely. And I'm a huge fan of minimum viable product, getting something out and testing it, Seth Godin's sort of banner of just, ship the product, ship it and get it out and test it. But before you do that, for me at least, figuring out, well, what are you going to do? Is there a need in the market? Are people willing to pay for it? All those entrepreneurial things. Can you offer it better than your competitors can? So that's sort of the planning to get it right. Because I've made enough mistakes in my life of not planning at all. And as you say, going out to market with the wrong things, and the market is not forgiving. But when I work with clients now, they've already gone through the planning. Typically, it hasn't worked to what they need to. There's a fire, and I don't go, hey, let's spend 2 weeks and we'll plan. It's really about triaging, getting in, and what I help them do is get to the right answer based on the knowledge that they have, and asking the questions, just like your great questions today, that will prompt their thinking, that will fill in their plan. Typically, a lot of the times, it's getting them to look at the big picture because they're so myopic on that particular challenge, but they betrayed their brand statement, or they actually get in the way of being more successful because they're actually in the coal face trying to fix one thing. So that's what I do. Over planning I wouldn't do, but in this one here, if the book wasn't great in my view, and hopefully else, I wouldn't have had the business that I had. So sometimes you just have to go, I'm going for it and I'm going to be the best and I'll put the time in.
I love that. Yeah, it's one of those things where I think whenever we're talking, especially with entrepreneurs, you got to kind of feel them out a little bit, because a lot of times entrepreneurs, when they're running a company, it's their baby, it's their product, from start to finish. And so it's really hard to see the forest between the trees. And so you have to get them to take that step back by asking great questions. And some are super detailed and planned. You got to be able to keep that pace. Some of them are super laid back, and you got to kind of not overwhelm them. So I love that kind of using questions to come in and take that. So you have your own consulting agency that, really helps leaders and their teams create a better future, right? And so
Absolutely.
You knew that you wanted to make an impact. What is that impact? And I guess, what is your mission for what you're doing today? And why do you think that's so important and needed in the current landscape as we look at the future of work 2021 going into 2022 after, everything changed and will continue to change with millennials now getting in leadership positions, Gen Z entering the workforce, the truly hyper-connected space. So what does that look like, and what are you thinking about as you manage your clientele and work with them?
Yeah, the mission I have hasn't changed, but how I articulate it and the services I provide have changed dramatically, especially given the pandemic, the generational shift. And it was always to help people be their best during uncertainty. And it was true 10 years ago, it's true now, but the uncertainty is really different. The pace of change, the amount of change that's happening is exponentially larger than when I started. But if you hold true to your values, if you hold true to your mission, it's how do you activate that with the entrepreneurs now? And there's one organization I'm doing work with, and they're a startup. And they're going so fast, and there's so many projects, and there's so many opportunities, which is amazing and a challenge. And what I'm finding is they're not prioritizing, and everything looks like a glittering prize. Everything looks like it's a great opportunity. And what I would say is everything is a drain or an investment in resources. And you can't have every opportunity doesn't have equal weight. But that entrepreneurial captain spirit, it's like, if I go for this, it would be fantastic. And what's happening is that they're diluting their base and a bit of a burnout that I'm finding as well. So if you're helping people be their best in times of huge uncertainty now, sometimes it's new leaders and asking the right questions to broaden their thinking, because again, every piece of cheese looks good when you see it, and you want to eat some cheese. But really to slow down meaning for 5 minutes, not slow down for anything more, and asking yourself some big questions. And another thing I find so important now, Rob, is that when people find themselves in the uncertainty of the market, and you can talk about pandemic, you can talk about sort of the explosion of digital, anything it is, or there's a new white space type territory that people are jumping in, anything like that, there is that fight, flight, or freeze condition that goes in us where we're afraid. We just don't know. And our past experience does not overlay to the new territory because we've never done it before. And I find that there's two defaults that entrepreneurs do, and especially now the younger entrepreneurs that don't have as many years of experience of making mistakes, learning from them, and moving forward, is what happens is they'll default to winging it. And as we know, winging it can be great, or winging it can be, hey, that's a pretty big risk that you're taking. Or the first available piece of data that seems right. It could be a consultant. It could be their best friend. It could be an article they read on Wired. It's whatever it is. They go with it and go, that makes sense. And then they go all in on that. And I find that it's a pretty big, if you're thinking about, entrepreneurship as investing in the market, you're going pretty hard on that one stock based on almost zero information. I hope you're lucky, because it might not work. And even if you're lucky now, 3 times down the road, the probability is you're going to make a big mistake. So what I do is there's 4 questions I love to share with your Bear Nation to say, when you're faced with something with uncertainty, there's 4 things you need to ask yourself. And this is what I found traveling the world with leaders. And they didn't necessarily do all 4, but the really good ones maybe did 3 of them. But the first one is, how important is this? And it could be in an opportunity. What am I going to get for this? How important it is to my overall business, not, creating a second division because you think there's opportunity there. But how important is this to my business and my long-term success, not my short-term success? Because often urgency, hey, get in now because you'll have first mover advantage. Yeah, but do you really want to get in there? And is that going to be right for your overall business? The second one is, and this is what I find entrepreneurs can do quite well, like, what facts and data do I need? So what information do I need to make a really good decision? And that leads to, what do I know already? And what do I need to know to make a sound decision? And this doesn't slow you down. This could be an hour.
Yeah. So quick question, because these 2, I think, are really interesting. And you're kind of talking about young entrepreneurs who don't have a lot of experience going through change, sometimes can make the wrong decision, or take the wrong advice. And I think in today's society, there's so much advice out there. I can find, and I joke all the time, like I master's in marketing, and I looked at they say that we still use Porter's 5 Forces, we still use the BCG matrix, we still use all these things, right? The 4 Ps. When I look at data, and I talk to this about, I've gotten in arguments with people, I can make the data whatever the fuck I want it to say. I can tell that story. And so we look, a lot of times we fear opposition. We look for validation. So we find that one story that validates, although opposition is where real growth happens. And you said a lot about fear, freeze, or, fight, flight, or freeze. And I think that when we start realizing that on the other side of fear is growth. And so I like how you bring those together. Then you said these two things. How important is this to my long-term success? And then what info do I need? And I have a question on this. What does long-term success mean when you're asking that question? Because for me, and maybe this is a personal thing, but as I talk to more, millennials and Gen Z out there, trying to figure life out is not going to happen. I still don't have it figured out. And now you and I had this conversation pre-show about we're still trying to figure life out as we go through different stages. And so what is long-term success? The question I hate the most is, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I don't fucking know. So many things can happen. So from a business perspective, I know we try to live in, the Dom Toretto. I live my life a quarter mile at a time. For entrepreneurs, I live my life a quarter at a time, right? What's these 3 months look like? What is the definition of long-term in the way that you're asking that question for your clients? I know that's a bit dependent on each client, but how do you define long-term? Is this important for my business long-term? And then what info do I need to secure that? So how do you define that? I just wanted to clarify those two things. That was a long diatribe but
awesome. Love it. In my corporate world, typically 3 years out would be a kind of a sweet spot where you'd sort of measure everything in the first year, each half in the second year, and then quarterly half, and then 1 year out. And that would have been, and I think that's still dated. I really don't think that's the way the world is working right now. What I find, and also when I'm working with entrepreneurs, wow, if we could even talk about the end of next year, that would be amazing, because there's so much changing and so much is being stale dated. We don't know, but even if we could tempt ourselves to think at the end of next year, so we're talking 5 quarters out, that would be amazing. That's what I'm talking about. And I find now when I read in the press and they're saying, well, what's our 5-year plan? Who knows? And has anyone ever gone back to a 5-year plan and looked how wrong that was? And I think what it does is it's like a Linus's blanket, like it's a warm blanket of pretend certainty where you really don't know. And now I find, and there's one organization I worked with, and their 3-year plan wasn't working. So they almost restructured. So every quarter they were redefining what their 3-year plan was. Yeah. And what I reflect for entrepreneurs is to say, well, man, if you can, you might want to just, think generally that you have a horizon plan. But what I find it works for people right now is if you could stretch to the end of next year, you're a genius, because too much is changing.
Well, you make a good point. This 5-year Linus blanket that you bring up, I think it's because investors want a 5-year plan, right? Because their ROI is within a 5-year window. So we now instinctively do everything in a 5-year clip. And maybe that's before my time, but as I hit this, entrepreneurial world in 2015, working for a startup, it was always 5 years at a time, 5 years. It was like this moving thing. And I always joke with the clients I work with, I say 369. You can think 369, damn, she fight that old song. I like, if you notice, I like to use song lyrics, the bare necessities, that get stuck in your head, right? So 369, what are you doing this quarter? What are you doing next quarter? And what are you doing in quarter 3? And I live and coach at that clip. Yes, it's good to have that moving goalpost at, 1 year, 3 year out. And the question I always like to ask is, at the end of this year, at the end of next year, what does success look like?
Beautiful.
Cool. That's what you want to be success, and then you work back. And so that's why I always like to ask this question, because I think a lot of people out there listening have this, we need a 5-year plan. 5 years is too long. Too much is going to change.
Right. And you've raised such a great point, Rob, about We can create 5-year plans. Like, we can throw assumptions in, and we can say we don't know what our competitors are doing, but we typically we suggest that they won't do much, right? So we're just in this incubator of our own self stuff, and look at innovation plans from any packaged goods companies about what they say is their funnel and what actually comes out. They're dramatically different. And the thing is, if we can get away from that desire of, well, we just need the blanket and then jump in, and then always say, what I find to deal with the one value of the 5-year plan or maybe the 3-year plan is, are we doing anything we don't want to do? So what I do is I ask entrepreneurs, what don't you want your business to become? And it's great because they know. That's an easier question to answer. Like, I don't want to commoditize my product. I don't want to get so large that I don't have an operational role. Or I want to expand geographically across the US. Right now we're in NYC, and I want to go nationwide. And this is great. Oh, well, you've got an opportunity in Italy. Is that going to accomplish your goal of getting to California? And if it's going to take rare resources, is that the best decision? Is that what you want? But I think that's the challenge and the opportunity for entrepreneurs right now.
You make such a great point that you have to be able to know when to say no. Is this working towards my vision or against it? Because it's really easy. Shiny object syndrome. Oh, there's opportunity in Italy, but my goal is to be over here. We get pulled because we think that's the next big thing. And kind of looking back at this 5-year plan thing, the one thing I noticed too is when we were doing that back in the 80s and 90s, because before the real information age of being hyper connected, the flow of information was you knew where it was coming from, and catalogs and whatever, and so you can kind of gauge the dynamic. There's the elasticity of that versus when 100 content creators can throw something out on YouTube, or a Reddit thread can make a stock just fly and crash the whole market in that fast thing. You can't have 5-year plans because we consume this information. So I know you gave us 1, how important is this to my long-term success? 2, what info do I need? What's number 3?
Number 3 is, who has the information I need to get? So that could be within your startup, that could be externally, it could be in the academic community, it could be your mom. It doesn't matter, but who has the information that I seek? And often I find with organizations, whether they're large or they're smaller, forces to contend with in the marketplace, is they tend to stay in their space. Their friends are startups, or if it's a corporate, they tend to be in the same industry. They go to the same association, but that's not where the best information is. Typically, I found it's external to the world in which you operate. And one thing I was presenting years ago at a key account conference, and it was just all about selling. And the best information that was there, and I was in packaged goods and in chocolate and candy and Trident, and that the best information was coming from the industry sector in the US. Best selling information. And what it did was underscore that how broadly are you going to look for the right information to give you competitive advantage? Because somebody has experienced something similar that will feed in to fill out the illustration of what the future might look like.
Yeah. No, I love that, because you hit something close to home. I ran a global boot camp, and one of the companies that went through it ultimately decided the U.S. really wasn't the right market for them, but they went into this global market to learn some really good sales tactics from the U.S. We're able to turn that into closing a lot of deals really quickly just by changing their thinking of how they go about with the process, and then adapting that process to the market, because sales is sales, right? When you think about globally, there's a few cultural differences, but they took a lot of those things and they had a very technical product and started incorporating video in their outreach and then video in their closing. Like one of them, the proposal, you're trying to get them on the phone to walk through the proposal because, open it up, they go to the very end and just look at the price. Couldn't get the client to commit to that. So I was like, okay, do your thing, send a video. Sent a video walking through. It was like a 2-minute loom walking through, and they sent that. And then made sure they watched that loom before they actually sent the proposal. And that closed to multiple deals. Like, hey, this is super awesome. Wow. Was able to take it because you walked me through the key points. We can go get this signed off on. And so I love that. It's like that shift of where do you find information that helps is really important, because sometimes you got to look outside your echo chamber. And you got to look outside of what you think is being said and really involve yourself to go seek that information out. So I love that key point. And for those out there listening, please, just because you're in this ecosystem of XYZ, sometimes the information you seek, you need to step outside of that and really push. Again, don't look for validation, look for opposition, because that's where you're going to find real good fit, and you're going to be able to adapt and say, okay, now I can either defend it the right way, and here's the information that defends that, or you learn to take it, because when people are validating for you, it makes it too easy, and then you go and don't tell anything, like, wow, well, I validated this. Yeah, but who did you validate it against? Are they the ones that have the info that you seek to make sure that you have right validation? Sorry, super bit of a tangent there, but I love this. I love this number 3.
Oh, that's great. And we tend to have, even though we try not to, we tend to gather people who think the way we think right now. And another default I find a lot of entrepreneurs make is that there's an assumption that it is in the entrepreneurial field, or maybe corporate, but the hottest change right now is going in government and not-for-profit. And typically it's pulling in more entrepreneurial people to do it because they're catching up after 30 years of bureaucracy typically. And they'll kind of say, well, no, that's not me. But it's your point, Rob, is it's about the information. It's not about your preconceived notions of where it comes through. That's not like my business, but maybe it is if you thought more broadly about the dynamics or the mechanics of it. It can really be like that. And so that's an exciting one. And can I share number 4? Because I love this one because most people don't do it. And what I find is that, and again, it's an extension of the glittery prize or the flavor of the month scenario where everybody's doing it. Like, everyone wants to be agile. Everyone wants to be synergistic. Everyone wants to whatever, grow 10x, whatever it is, whatever story you've bought into. But some things that people have done will not work within the culture of your organization. And it could be a culture of 3 entrepreneurs, or it could be a culture of, you've got a software business with 250 people and you've grown by 50% in 2 years. Certain things, what works well and what doesn't work well within the culture of your organization, because everything's connected to the culture. And it's so easy to get organ rejection when you pick up something and you don't customize it back to the organization that you're working with. And sometimes the challenge, as any consultant or any coach as we are, is if you don't translate it to what will work within the culture of the entrepreneur, it won't last. You might be able to hammer it in. It's not going to give you the value. People will reject it. So it's how do you morph it into something that's right for your business? And so many entrepreneurs, so many leaders in corporate, they take something that is not necessarily connected, but the idea is right, but they don't convert it into what works well and what doesn't in our organization. Yeah,
that is definitely something I see happen a lot is, hey, they're doing this, so we should do it too. And in fact, one of my favorite books is Steal Like an Artist by Austin Kleon, which talks about,
me too,
taking things that you love from others and then adapting it. But the key message there, the book says it, but obviously, it's a shorter book, so it doesn't go deep into this, but you have to really hit home is that if you're going to do something, how does it be authentically part of your brand? Who you are as a culture, who is a company, and fitting it back to your why. So just because you like it and somebody else is doing it and you want to take that, you need to make sure that you take it and put, that bit of you on it. Otherwise, it's not going to work long term within the organization. So I love number 4. So these are great. I mean, these are 4 key questions that any entrepreneur out there listening as part of Bear Nation, you should write these down and ask yourself this with your organization. I think will be super helpful. So I want to switch gears. We've got a few minutes left here, and I want to kind of get to this piece of, you worked in large global corporate for a long time, and then you became an entrepreneur. And thinking about your journey and your story, what would you tell your younger self? What advice would you give yourself, 20 years ago, 10 years ago even, about where you are today, and what would that look like, and why? My biggest message would be to have the confidence to do what you believe is true. And again, the 4 questions are great, but it's not just, hey, I've got a dream and I'm going to do it. But if you do see
something in the marketplace, because so many people, I find, when you look at advice, should I do it, should I not do it, they're giving advice from their perspective. So of course, if you're an accountant and you're saying, hey, I'm going to start my own business and give everything up that you've got, and this is my passion, the accountant most likely will say, well, I don't know, it's pretty risky. But she or he's really responding to if they were in your shoes, not if you're in your shoes. And I had this experience once early in my career, and it was an Olympic athlete, which is timely for now, Mark Tewksbury, which is an Olympic gold swimmer. And I heard him speak in his autobiography, and I asked him for his number one banner motivator statement. And his was, why not me? And I find so many times we hold back on going to the next level because of those insecurities. And I think why not me is something great. So when I jumped from corporate and then into entrepreneurship and dove into it, I made a mistake at the beginning. And I told you, Rob, that, hey, I wanted to do specific business, but my first client was my past employer. And pretty well as a gig economy, I was essentially taking on a large change for the organization, but nothing had changed except my labor relation with the organization. So I knew who I was working with. It was great. It was a really good experience. And I wasted over a year's time for what I really wanted to do. And what happened is I fell short. I kind of I didn't do a full swing and hit it out of the park. I bunted because it was safer. And I think in hindsight, what I'd say is whenever you can play it safe, that takes you away from what you want to do, really consider it. And sometimes you need to, but don't let yourself fall short and not be as successful as you want because you're hedging your bets. And I think what I learned when I did my first book is Wiley, who published it globally, had said, well, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I'm going to start my own business, but, I might do this and that. And they said, oh, that's too bad because, we want all in people. And I think that is what has really driven me now. So now it's all in. And now I focus on, I don't look back and I move forward and I have the confidence in what I believe I offer in the marketplace that doesn't have as much, people who have experienced internal corporate and now are coaching and offering change support. That's what I'd say. Don't look back, just keep going. And sometimes they say don't have a plan B, which might be good or not for Bear Nation. But I'd say if you've got an idea, go for it and make sure that you support yourself. But don't play it safe would be my first piece of advice.
I love that. Don't play it safe and have confidence in yourself, right? Because I think, to be honest with you, especially through Bear Nation, we've gone through different stories of those that put it all on the line with a hope and a dream, those that have ran it as a side hustle, turning it into a full-time thing. Whatever your journey, it's really important. Your journey is impressive because it's yours. And whatever that is, don't have to subscribe to you need to be a part of the hustle culture or side hustle until play it safe and side hustle it until you can earn enough. And my philosophy is somewhere between. But a lot of times I see people who side hustle it burn out because they're working 40 hours at one job, 40 hours at another, and forgetting time for personal relationships. But that's a conversation for another day. But
can I throw in one more though?
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, whatever your journey is, it needs to be what you want it to be, right? What you want it to be, not what others tell you it should be.
So true. And one more I'd share with Bear Nation too is don't let either your success or your ego walk you away from your customer. And what I mean by that is, you start in and this is what you want to serve and it's all about the customer. But then either you get successful, you start growing, and you get further away from your customer. And the ego is, hey, I know the product that they really need because I know everything. Or and it's an exaggeration, but it's true. Hey, I know the customer better not. And to give you a quick example is when I wrote my second book, I thought, it's all about people who have no time to read large change books. They're right at the point where they're sinking or swimming, and I don't want to write a book that would be great for me and not great for people like that. So I did the minimum viable product. I created 18 people who evaluated everything in the book, and I went with what they wanted. The cover is my second favorite. The design of the illustrations is my third favorite. I cut out 40 mini chapters because people wanted to focus on the 44 that were the best. And what it did is it suppressed my ego and forced me to create something that they wanted versus what I wanted. And I think the metaphor is strong for any entrepreneur, especially if you're getting success.
Yeah.
Be careful that you don't think that you are your client, because typically you're not.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I think that's a great, piece of advice for anyone out there, to make sure that you really check your ego, and leverage that thinking, because you're being brought in from an outside perspective, or you're being brought in for a specific reason, not to think as them, but to help them through something specific. So we're coming up on the end of time here. I want to ask you one or two more final questions, because you gave a great piece of advice there. But what, when we think about all the things you said, what do you think is your superpower?
My superpower, and what I love the question is it's a forced choice too. And what I would say is making connections is my superpower. I had it when I was high school, and there were, different, kid groups getting together at parties or dances or whatever. But it was always an ability of mine to take people with different and disparate needs and aligning them on a common goal. So with entrepreneurs, it's what's the vision that's going to align your teams to move forward? If there's a disconnect and a change and you've got different leaders wanting different things, what's the common ground that will be our foundation that will move forward? And understanding that we have different needs as well. And it's the superpower of coming in and facilitating a workable solution for people that they can move forward, because when it's not workable, they atrophy or they get stuck. And as long as everyone can get what they want, what they need, but not necessarily get what they want, that's my superpower. And I do it personally, but I also do it in work as well.
Love that. And I think that's a great superpower. So when we think about kind of a lasting message, for those that are entrepreneurs, thinking about being an entrepreneur, entrepreneurial minded, what's a lasting message? What advice would you give them to close out this episode?
In your journey, entrepreneurial journey, never compromise your referability. And what I mean by that is never take the decision that might be underhanded, or cutting someone out, or doing something that's not aligned with your values. And over the years, and in my world, over the decades, I've seen people who've compromised their ethics or they've compromised their values just because it would move them forward, and they don't necessarily want to do it, but the pressure of the moment does it, and it always comes back to haunt them. Nobody wants to partner in an entrepreneurial venture when you've proven yourself to be disloyal or your scruples are questionable. And all it takes is one major issue where you don't take the right decision to lose trustworthiness, and that's your biggest asset. If you can't be trusted, whether it's your investors, your employees, whomever, you've really killed your credibility. And sometimes you might want to, because it's short term and you're just only going to do it once. It's one time too many. And then I think you look back and you feel really good about your journey and the success that you have.
I love that. I think it's a great kind of lasting message and great advice for anyone out there listening. And when we think about what Phil just shared, Carnation, that this happens at any stage of life, and it's designed to take it with you in all different assets. And who you are today is not who you're going to be tomorrow, and you don't have to have it all figured out. And I wish we could go for another hour, because there's a whole side of Phil that I'm going to make sure that we link all his information to be found. When he started his career in corporate and then change, what you don't know, and we talked a lot today about different things that he's experienced and some different key learning lessons, is that he built his consultancy not to scale. Meaning he's not trying to say, hey, I wanted to build it to be a 20-person company or a 50-person company or be a multi-billion-dollar company. It's, I wanted to make the best impact, and I wanted to be able to work across multiple industries. And I think it's really important for all you entrepreneurs out there. And to take a look at Phil and what he's doing and connect with him after, that not every company has to go public or be a unicorn. Not every one of you out there has to build the next, Airbnb. You can build a successful multi-million-dollar business and be a team of one or a team of five and be super happy and have an impact. And I think we're so caught up in this world of entrepreneurship of we need to have the next unicorn and IPO versus what makes me happy, passionate, and fulfilled. And if you're looking for somebody that lives that is Phil Buckley. So Phil, where can Bear Nation find you so I can drive them to you to have those conversations and learn more?
Thanks, Rob. I'd love to talk to everyone. The email address is phil@changewithconfidence.com. That's a great way just to come direct. LinkedIn is fantastic as Phil Buckley 01 to connect there because it's such a powerful community. And changewithconfidence.com is my website. And the reason why I point you there is there's tons of free information for you on your entrepreneurial journey. But let's have a conversation. I would love it. Thanks, Rob, for that opportunity.
You bet, Phil. And I'll make sure to link that in the show notes. Also, check out his books. I'll make sure to get those links and put them in the show notes so that they can easily purchase if you would so wish. Phil, thank you so much for sharing so much with Bear Nation today. Appreciate you for being a part of the show.
Thank you, Rob. It's a privilege and a shout out to Bear Nation. You're doing great things. Keep moving. Rob, thank you so much for the time today.
Absolutely. Bear Nation out there, thank you so much. We will see you for our next episode. Stay well. Bear Nation, once again, thank you for listening to the Bare Necessities of Entrepreneurship. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave us a review. And until next time, take care.